For those of you who are, I missed saying Happy Mother's Day yesterday, so happy Mother's Day. Um, I had an interesting conversation yesterday at church with one of the grandmothers who is the grandmother of some kids that used to go to school with my son when he went to school. And I think she changed my mind on some stuff, not about homeschooling in the way that you would think. So I always like the idea of homeschooling and controlling the curriculum because I knew I know for myself, I hated school when I was a kid. Like, I didn't do well. It was awful. Grade school was just not for me. And when I say grade school, I basically mean like I didn't do kindergarten the same way. So it wasn't mandatory back then. So I would say first grade through really, I mean, there was like a couple good teachers along the way. Junior year was okay. I got that for most of my classes. Senior year, some of my classes. But that's because by then you were kind of picking different I'd switched schools, first of all, they had different options, and by then, I'd done all the necessary stuff. So, I had my however many years of math and science and what have you. And so by my senior year, I literally took, like, TV production, theater, like, theater arts, music theory, creative writing, a psychology class. It's like going to college, like a liberal arts college. Um, and then I started college and it felt the same to me. I was like, oh, this is so stupid because you're back into, you have to take your math corp, your math need, your whatever, the class you need, and your English things. And you're there. And I was like, it's like high school all over again. And I hated it. Um, but then I'd have a good teacher and I'd learn something. And then I switched majors like 3 or 4 times. And the funny thing is, I always hated history. I have a history degree. I'm a history teacher. I always hated history because it was so like read the textbook and then memorize the dates and then regurgitate back the dates of the textbook. And that was what it was. And I hated the way the learning structure was. Um, you'd see the movies, where, oh God, what was that movie? Oh Captain, My Captain with um, Robin Williams, Dead Poet Society and all that, where the teachers would really get you involved and, maybe you weren't learning exactly, how to write a thesis, but you were learning what you needed to know about English lit, really, um, what it meant to be creative in writing. So when my son was born, I originally thought about homeschooling, went back and forth, changed my mind, decided I didn't want to do public school, went to Catholic school, figured it would be a good community. Didn't work out. You can watch my thing on homeschooling to find out about that. Um, but there was always that piece of the socialization and kids learning to, creating bonds of friendship with these people that they grow up with and, learning how to work things out for themselves and things like that. I'm Gen X. So we were on our own. It was like, okay, you went home after school and there was no parents. You just went outside and played and you figured things out. If you got into a fight with someone, you dealt with that fight. You dealt with the repercussion. You had to explain why you had a black eye, whatever the situation was. Um, and and there was no, you you had to, hopefully you had a sibling that could, make up a good story for you. No, no, remember you tripped. You tripped. That's what he she tripped. It was he's fine. Whatever. But it was very much um it was very much children on their own figuring things out. Um, we didn't quite get to the Lord of the Flies territory, but there was some times it came close. Um, but it was fun, it was great, it was whatever, and then I was listening to this is before I even decided to go homeschooling. I was listening to a podcaster talk, um, about how So he was he was back and he did all kinds of school. He was Tim Pool, if you know him. He did everything from he was homeschooled, he was public schooled, he was parochial schooled, he quit school, he did everything. And he said the whole thing was stupid because when you send these kids to these schools, it's like kids are raising each other instead of grown-ups raising each other. And at the time I was like, no, it's good. Kids could, kids need to learn how to relate to each other and react to each other and they learn from each other and all that kind of stuff. Um and then when I started homeschooling, um I was talking to someone and they asked me about like friendships and things. I'm like, they'll have pods, they'll have they'll have that. And I was trying to get my kid involved in as many things as I could. We really are very much introverts. I know it's amazing I sit here and talk like this, but um like even there was times when there'd be pictures sent home from recess and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I was just playing with a rock on the side by myself." And I'm like, "Okay." Or like they had this time when they did these like dance party things and his boy, all his friends would be off, playing sports, which he didn't like. And he'd just be like standing on the side. He wasn't with the girls, but he was like standing on the side, like dancing by himself. Or there'd be a picture of him just sitting on the side reading a book. And I'm like, why aren't you playing with your friends? He's like, "Oh, I didn't feel like it." And I'm like, right, Mr. Introvert. So I was a little concerned about his social skills and him meeting friends. And so people would say to me, like, "What are you gonna do about friends?" I'm like, "Well, we have friends that we've met through the school before and through other play groups and different things, and we can make sure to set up play dates." And they're like, "Don't you feel a little bit like you're picking his friends? Like, what about people he was friends with before that you're not really friends with his parents?" I'm like, "Well, most of the kids that, that I got to know, like they're good kids, I got to be friends with the parents." And I said, and I honestly, there's a certain amount of it's good to kind of pick your parents. I mean, have your parents pick your friends. They're like, "How would you feel if your dad had picked your friends back in the day?" Because I was raised by a single dad. So I was like, "How would you feel if your dad?" I was like, honestly, he probably would have made better choices. Like I had some really screwed up friends that led me down some really screwed up paths. And I know the friends that he would have chosen. And, Priyanka and Laura and all these wonderful kids that I was friendly with and that I was, good friends with for summer camps and for different things. But then you get back into school and, you things would change. You get to high school, everybody branches in different directions. And I'm like, yeah, I probably would have been in a lot better position in my life if he had chosen my friends. And then I had this conversation with the grandmother yesterday. And she's telling me about this one kid at school, which I'm not going to mention any names because this is an actual ongoing thing. But this one kid at school who's like, you know, and I know it sounds stupid because they're in fourth grade and whatever, but he's like talking to them about sex and he's talking to them about like cursing words and all these kind of things. And I remember people saying, "Oh, well, they learned it at school. Oh, well, they learned it at school." And I'm like, "Well, I sent him to Catholic school. I know the kids he hangs out with. He's not going to learn this stuff from the kids that he hangs out with." But then it's like, well, there's more to it than the kids he hangs out with. And I have other friends. I'm friends with other mothers. And they're like, "Do you have the, because I used to have everybody's name. I was always involved in the school stuff. Do you have so and so's mom's information?" And I was like, "Yeah, I got it from the old directory and da 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 and whatever." And they're like, "I really need to call her. We're having nothing but I mean, there's like major hubbub going on about this one kid who's causing problems." And I was like, "Wait, they're talking to him about what? Like, why does why does this fourth grader know? Like, this is crazy, the things that they're talking about." And I'm realizing, like, public school, especially, because everybody from town just does whatever they do, and you have no say in it. That's how I grew up. And, my dad was like, "What? If I could choose, I would not have you choose play with these kids." Um, for the most part, there was a couple of good ones. Um, but you're thinking, okay, I sent him to our church school. I like our church community. I like the people that I like, this is the community that I would want him to be involved in. But of course, not everybody that goes to the church school goes to the church. That's not how this works. I'm starting to realize like that's really a big thing that made a difference in society in general is, everybody used to just be taught at home, maybe a small little local school to, like for the basic reading and writing, first through like fifth grade or something. You got your basics, reading, writing, arithmetic during the winter months when you weren't farming or what have you. Um, Even then, once factory work started, kids didn't get summers off. They just worked in the factories. But that's neither here nor there. Um, but it really was much more like you had your family, and then your family had its church, and then the church, you got to know each other, and you would say, "Oh, we don't associate with that family. Oh, we don't," and you really were like your morals, your things that you wanted your kids to know, not know. Everything was really designed around your life. And I was talking to this grandmother, and she was talking about, how things have changed and all of her kids have been divorced. And I'm like, yes, somewhere along the lines it changed where like you used to marry someone because you were involved in the same church, the same organizations, the same whatever. You had things in common, you had the same morals, you just had to. And now it's like you date someone because they're cute, maybe you like the same music. Yeah. And that's not a basis of a relationship forever. You get bored with each other. Eventually, you realize how different you really are when it's time to, and usually after you have kids, one of them changes dramatically in one way and one of them changes dramatically in the other way, or one of them doesn't change at all. It's like, I haven't changed at all. What's the problem? Yeah, that's kind of the problem. You think they're going to change and grow up, but they don't. Um, so my point is that when people ask about socialization, I, you know, my kid is doing this like a town sports thing because I'm trying to get him to do anything outside and exercising because he spends so much time, with me. We don't just go run and play tag all the time. Um, so I'm trying to get him into this little sports thing. And I'm like, why isn't he going over and talking to anybody? And, my friend's like, well, he's kind of an introvert. I'm like, I know, but he talks to people. And then he's like, he's much better with adults. And I'm like, that's true. And I hear that a lot from homeschool people where it's like, oh, they communicate better with adults than they do peers their own age. And I used to think, oh, that's awful. They should make some friends their own age. And I remember I used to be like that too. I could much more easily communicate with adults and babies, but not my peers. And I'm thinking, why is it bad that they communicate better with adults than their peers? The whole point of socializing them is so that they become competent adults who can handle things. So if they're already at a point where they can communicate with adults, you're like more than halfway there. Not that he doesn't have friends. We just went and had a fun time with his cousin. We do play dates, we do our things. He has his core friends that I approve of. Um, but yeah, it's like we've become this society of like just let the feral children run and figure it out, like us Gen X's were. And most of us did not, as much as we're like, oh, we're the good generation. We don't matter. Half of us aren't married, the other half are divorced. Like we're not doing as well as people think we are. And I think getting back to some of those, like the roots of real community, that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it does, but you want to make sure the people in your village aren't the village crazy people. We all know those village crazy people. It takes people to help you to teach your children the morals and the values and the ideas that you want your child to know, and not just to be sent out into the backwoods to find out whatever it is they get told. I mean, I can remember as a child finding out things or telling kid things and being like, oh, you don't know that, in both directions. And so now, thankfully, my kid got out last year before this kid started causing havoc. But I was asking him, I'm like, oh, when you're with your friends, and he knows he can tell me, and I'm like, do you and your friends like swear? Do you guys like use the bad words? And And I've told them, I'm like, "It's mostly grown-ups don't wanna hear kids using those words. I'm not gonna, they're gonna learn the way they learn. It's best not to, but I'm not gonna get mad at him if he does." And, and he says things like sometimes they use the SH word. So I'm like, "Oh, you mean like SHI?" And he's like, "No, SHU." And I'm like, "You mean shut up?" "Yeah, they use that a lot, and sometimes the J word." And I'm like, "Jerk." He's like, "Yeah, that's another bad word." And I was like, "Okay, so no, they're not using bad words." But to him, that's like a bad word. So when I hear the things that's coming out of this kid's mouth, I'm like, "Oh, I'm so glad my kid's not in that school anymore." And I have a friend that's always like, "Oh, by the time they're this and they're on the internet and they do this and everybody," and I'm like, "Okay, feral child, like not everybody's raised like this. Not everybody has unlimited access to internet. Not everybody has these situations of just free everything." And I think that if people start, like, even the father of one of the kids was like, "Tell me about this homeschooling thing." What I'm done. This school is awful. They handle everything wrong. They handle everything this. The grandmother of the other kids told me that the parents had said to keep their kid away from the bad kid, and you know, she was there just kind of like as a, how like the parents and grandparents can go and help with like lunchtime and stuff. And the guidance counselor had gone over and, like, seen them together and talked to them and, like, fist bumped them, and so she asked the kid later, like, "What was that all about?" And he's like, "Oh, she just said we're gonna behave, right?" It's like, "Wait, but your parents specifically said not to put those kids together." "Yeah, well." So the schools are just doing whatever they want. They're thinking as long as, it doesn't cause a ruckus, as long as no one's fighting, it doesn't matter what's happening, but it does. It really matters. Kids are learning things that they really shouldn't be learning from their quote unquote peers who aren't their peers because they're not peers are people who are on your level. But if they're on very different levels in these situations. I think just because you're in the same age group, that doesn't necessarily make you a peer. I learned that a long time ago. I just think people need to start putting more attention into their homes and into their families and creating a community that kids can grow up and be respectful and strong individuals instead of thinking, "Oh, you gotta make sure that they go out and do what society says, and yeah, they're gonna get corrupted because that's what society does, and don't worry about it." It's like, no, that's no. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. I just had to talk about my conversation on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day.